Right. Nilesh bhai, I know that you have a very nice framework of analyzing what's happening around the world. Today, the biggest problem that investors or our clients are also grappling with is multiple variables which are at play. I mean, we got hit by this pandemic sometime in February, March. Of course, markets tanked and there was widespread panic. Post that, we've seen a lot of the Western governments as well as in India reacting very, very quickly to this crisis. I mean, there is a lot of money which has been put into markets from the fiscal side as well as from the monetary side. Globally, markets are almost close to their all-time high. I'm especially referring to the US. So really, this last 2-3 months has been very, very puzzling for investors as at large. And a lot of what is happening is not from a classic playbook. I mean, even when I go back to history, what I've read or whatever I've experienced, a lot of it doesn't seem to be from a classic playbook. So really would like to know your framework of looking at things around the world and how does it impact India?
So Ashish, as they say, history repeats itself and wise man learns from the history. There's a fantastic book called Lords of Finance, which talks about central bankers of Great Depression era. And one conclusion is that they converted depression into Great Depression by not taking appropriate action at the right time and by withdrawing stimuluses at the wrong time. I think every central banker in the world has learned this from this book, and they want to ensure that they don't become the cause for the immediate recession. The textbook is now that if there is crisis in economy, pump liquidity, cut interest rates, ensure that there is limited pain, survive the short term, will figure out what to do in the long term. I will call this, in what was our childhood favorite serial, Star Trek, to boldly do what no other man has done before. So Bank of Japan is the leader in this time. In 91, when Japan hit recession, they cut interest rates to zero. They pumped liquidity, where now their internal debt to GDP ratio is more than 250%. They have become largest investor in ETFs on Japanese companies, and they are now the largest owner of Japanese equity across the world. Clearly, all over the world, we are seeing this Bank of Japan movement, where ECB, US Fed, Bank of England, all are talking about extremely low interest rates, extremely high liquidity, refinancing windows, essentially ensuring that there is no short-term pain to the extent possible. If you see globally, the GDP forecast is likely to be down by about $12 trillion from $85 trillion to $73 trillion. And the economic stimulus announced by various countries around the world, and it is still being announced, is already upwards of $20 trillion. So as Stanley Druckenmiller put, never underestimate the power of US Fed. It can lift any asset prices. And we are seeing this in various formats.
I think he had famously coined that term Fed put, right?
Yes. The same guy, after coining Fed put, went wrong in predicting what Fed will do in 2020. And he raised his hands and said that, look, I underestimated the power. I think this power of money is also visible in segments like automobile, where Tesla with $26 billion sales is the most valuable automotive company. And it's more than the combined value of GM, Ford, Ferrari, Toyota, whose combined sales is more than $700 billion. So there is, on one side, extremely high liquidity, extremely low interest rates, which can inflate any asset value, irrespective of what the fundamental might be.
Right, right. Nilesh, I just wanted to dwell a little more on the point that you made, Laws of Finance, the book which was written on the Great Depression, because a lot of comparisons are being made between the current period and the period of depression in the US. In fact, Buffett himself referred to it in his AGM, in his speech, annual speech. Point out to everyone that at that time, US was linked to the gold standard. The currency was linked to the gold standard, and hence they didn't do stimulus quick enough, like you said. And secondly, about 6,000 odd banks failed at that time. Whereas this time, remarkably, I mean, even during the global financial crisis, Fed put a lot of money in the banking system to ensure that a lot of banks survive. I mean, after the failure that we saw. And this time around, in fact, Fed has gone one step further, where they've not just put money in the banking system, they've actually put money in the hands of people. Now, I just wanted to know the difference between the Great Depression and now, and what are the medium term implications? Because a lot of comparisons are being made, to be very honest. But when I read the history, they are different to quite an extent.
So when Great Depression came, uh, again, my memories are from reading books and reading research papers, no direct experience. I think there the central bankers were not having unlimited ability to print money. The political class was willing to give short-term pain for long-term gain. They were in the 90s or 97's IMF recommendation to India and Southeast Asia. If you remember, when we went through crisis in 91 and Southeast Asia in 97, we were told, bring your fiscal house in order, cut government expenditure, divest and raise resources, raise interest rates so that you can attract foreign capital, open your economy for foreign investment. Essentially, all their strategies were for our long-term improvement. They pushed us to lower import duty on thousands of products so that our manufacturing can become competitive. Now, in the process, there was immense short-term pain. Interest rates went up, protection came down, government expenditure came down, tax revenue went up, tax burden went up. But this is like, putting a person to exercise when he's suffering from cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes. There was short-term pain, but long-term gain. On the other hand, in 2008 subprime crisis or 2013 PIGS crisis of Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, the approach was totally different. They focused on short-term gain rather than long-term pain. Their whole approach was to lower interest rates to zero, give as much government spending as needed, increase fiscal spending beyond limits, monetize deficit by involving central bank's balance sheet. Pre-crisis, US Fed balance sheet was $1 trillion. Post-crisis, it became $4.5 trillion. They pumped $3.5 trillion into US economy. ECB came saying that whatever it takes, we will do. So somewhere the world has shifted from short-term pain, long-term gain to short-term gain, long-term pain kind of scenario. And as I mentioned, Bank of Japan is the leader to boldly do what no central banker has done before. So we never know, we don't know how this will end, but might as well enjoy the music while the play is going on.
Just to extend that thought, Nilesh bhai, what could be the medium-term implications of this strategy of short-term gain? I don't know whether there'll be long-term or medium-term pain, but what could be the possible implications, and what should investors be wary of?
So I think Japan is a classical example where, despite high liquidity, low interest rates, and bold approach of the Bank of Japan, the GDP growth is declining. So one thing is quite visible to everyone in the world, that if you are not open to migration, if you're not willing to accept best of the brains from outside your country, you will stagnate. Right. Somewhere when the focus is on foreign direct investment, where capital surplus country bring their capital into capital deficit country, we will migrate towards foreign direct labor where labor surplus countries like India, China, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan will send surplus labor to these developed countries despite their cultural issues and so on and so forth. The entire growth of Middle East is based on migrant labor. In many developed worlds, migrant labor, apart from migrant intellectuals, will add value to their GDP. And if you don't accept migrant labor like migrant intellectuals, you will probably go towards stagnation like Japan. The second thing, growth will become a premium. Uh, there are countries like Japan which are stagnating for a variety of reasons, apart from what I mentioned earlier in terms of acceptance of migration. But clearly, there will be countries like India, China, which will continue to grow as their per capita GDP is significantly lower than global averages. The capital will shift towards these countries where growth opportunity is higher, and mixture of global capital along with rule of law in those respective countries can create a cycle of growth. There will be shift of capital from developed worlds to developing world, and there will be shift of labor from developing worlds to developed worlds, and that will create a global integration, a better growth, and probably more equitable growth in the days to come.
No, great, Nilesh bhai. Just to sum up for our viewers, I think it's very important to differentiate the Japanese example and probably the US one. Like Nilesh bhai said, that you can pump in a lot of money, but in the long run, GDP growth is a function of population and productivity. When I say population, it's the working class population. So I think he beautifully explained the reason why Japan has stagnated, because they didn't allow migration and the working age population has reduced. So in spite of all that stimulus, the Japan has really faced a challenge of growth, whereas US has still grown in spite of a lot of stimulus they put. In the future, we'll see how it works out. But I think one of the big advantages of US is they have continued to allow migration, and intellectual capital has continued. So in the same light, it is quite possible that China and India continue to grow, because at least when it comes to, we have a very large working population, and some of the policy measures, reforms can really accelerate productivity. I mean, that's the hope. If it accelerates productivity, then India and China can grow. And if India and China grows, like Nilesh bhai said, that growth will be at a premium. So there is a possibility that large pools of capital which have been infused, there is a possibility those pools of capital could continue chasing countries like India and China if people see reliable growth in the future. Nilesh bhai, coming home, right? Given this context and framework which you very beautifully explained, what are the implications for India? Because here, what we have chosen